We're going to focus this afternoon, as I said, on the SARB process and looking at the pieces of that, and in particular focusing on some of those compliance areas and making sure that as you go through you have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, particularly if your cases end up going completely through the process for legal recourse. And Sal and I had a chance to talk a little bit at lunch about the status of where things are with the district attorney, because I know that's a little bit challenging, but we'll talk about that as we get through the process. So as a reminder about attendance, we know that attendance problems, when students are not coming to school, there's typically some reasons why, and there tend to be larger issues that are facing the student and or the family. So what we're doing with the SARB process is not just identifying who the kids are, but why they're having those issues and trying to help resolve them. We know that they're solvable problems, but they do require a commitment of time and resources, and in some cases, with some families, a whole lot of time and resources. We can all probably think about one family that we've worked with that we spent lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of time with. And sometimes that's what it takes to get that turnaround, but we know that that's part of it. It takes a village. So thinking about attendance, it's not one person's responsibility. So even though you may have supervisor of attendance in your job description, or you are the attendance clerk, or you are an administrator at your site, it's not one person's responsibility, because this work is way beyond the scope of one person. So I know that in the morning we talked about the responsibilities and updated duties of supervisors of attendance. So they're responsible for kind of coordinating those activities, but this is also where we need to call upon the other people that we have as support to be able to help us with this work. Again, as a reminder, SARB, sometimes when people think of SARB, they think about the actual SARB meeting and they don't think about it as a process. We really need to reframe that and think about SARB as the process from start to finish. What are we doing at the prevention level? What are we doing at the early identification and intervention level? What are we doing at the intensive intervention level? So we're going to be talking about those pieces. The goal with this process is that as we're intervening, we want to make sure that students are screened back to positive attendance. Our goal is never to get to the point of doing a SARB or prosecuting parents. That's not the goal, because it's not a positive outcome for us. We don't really benefit if a parent gets fined, or if they have to go to court, or if they go through a process. We don't really benefit from that, and neither does the student. So the goal is really to get them back to coming to school on a regular basis. SARB is an intensive intervention that's utilized when the school site has exhausted all of its resources and interventions. So this afternoon, as we talk about these different tiers, the first couple of tiers that we talk about are really going to be focused at the site level. So for those of you here in the room that are site administrators or site support staff, site positions, we're going to talk about some of the activities that you can implement to help assist with this process and make it as effective as possible. For the people in the room that are district people, again, talking about how we can support what's happening at the sites, because it needs to be kind of unique to that site based on the resources that they have. A little background about the history of SARB. This was created by legislative statute in the mid-1970s. So SARB is not something new. It's been around for a very long time. In terms of how we've utilized it or not utilized it, I think that's shifted over time. Some of you may be in a position where you had a SARB a long time ago and then it kind of fell by the wayside, either because there really wasn't anyone responsible for it or running it, or maybe resources dried up, or maybe a combination of all of those things. And now you're looking to kind of revamp and reinstitute the SARB process. So we're going to talk about what that would be. The power from SARB comes from laws and education code, penal code, welfare and institutions code, and vehicle code. So we actually pull from a lot of different areas when we're talking about the SARB process. The legislative intent of SARB, again, to frame our conversation today, the goal of SARB was really to identify intensive guidance and coordinated community services to be provided to meet the needs of students with school attendance or school behavior problems. There's nothing in here when you read the legislative intent, and again, this goes back to the 70s, there's nothing in here about the goal of SARB being to punish families or punish students. The goal is about providing the support and services that they need to return them to regular school attendance. So when we're thinking about this process, I think in the past sometimes we got into a mindset of, you know, we need to change behavior by talking about consequences or talking about punishment or talking about what's going to happen or making threats about different steps of the process, when that was really never the intention of SARB. The intention of SARB was to support families to get them back to school. Why are SARBs useful? Because some people have just said, why are we even going to bother running a SARB? They don't feel like SARB has teeth. They don't feel like SARB was effective. They felt like it's a lot of resources. Do we even have the time and energy to be able to run a SARB? So in some places, they just said, we're not going to do SARB at all. I would make the argument that the reason that you want to have a SARB is because SARB really provides leadership to focus on those different tiers. SARB is the body and the group of people who can assist with this process. They can resolve school-related issues through collaboration and coordination of services. They build capacity. They identify and divert students with school attendance problems away from the juvenile justice system. And they do have the power to refer cases to court in cases of parental noncompliance. So I would argue that just saying it hasn't worked in the past for us, so why are we going to invest in having a SARB? I would recommend that you really take a look at that and start to build up highly effective SARBs. We have models of these across the state as part of the Model SARB Recognition Program. We know what they look like. We know what some of their activities are. We know that they've been effective in the data that they've been able to provide to us. You do have model SARBs in this area and people that you can call on as a result of that. So I know we have McFarland. I know we have Kern. What other districts am I missing that are model SARBs that are in the room? I know those two, okay. So these two, okay, raise your hands if you're Kern High School District and if you're McFarland. Yay, okay. So these people in the room are good resources for you because they've developed highly effective SARBs that are producing outcomes and bringing kids back to school. So if there are pieces of this process that we talk about today and you're thinking, I'd really like to see that in practice, I'd really like to see what that looks like, I want to see what forms they're using or what's been effective for them, these model SARBs are a great place to start, and they're close to you. And I'm sure as part of becoming a model SARB, part of the responsibility of that is being a mentor to other SARBs. So reach out to these people and have them assist you with that. In terms of the power and authority of SARB, here are 4 areas that are really specific to the SARB process. SARBs have subpoena power. They can issue directives. Under certain parameters, they can involuntarily transfer students to county community schools, and they can provide referrals for legal action. So the codes are cited under there for you. We're going to talk about some of these pieces in more detail, but just to give you a quick overview, some people will say, again, they have no teeth, they have no power to do anything. This is kind of explaining what some of those powers are. Okay, SARB structure. So in terms of how this is laid out in education code, we have state SARBs, county SARBs, and local SARBs. So we'll go through each one of those a little bit. And I know at the beginning, Sal mentioned that the next state SARB video conference, he invited people to participate and be a part of that. Have all of you had the chance to participate in a state SARB video conference? Have you done that before? Okay, if you have not participated in a state SARB video conference, I would recommend that you try at least one. If you would like to and have the ability to go up to Sacramento for that conference, great. But otherwise, county offices host those video conferences, and I know that that happens here through Kern. So you can work with Sal to figure out how you can be here and be a part of that. It is kind of an all-day commitment. It's from 9:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, but you'll get to see how this body works and what they do during the course of one of these regular meetings. So state SARB is a multi-agency board that's convened by the Superintendent of Public Instruction. In order to be a state SARB member, you submit paperwork to the state, kind of gives a little bit of background about who you are, and the recommendation is made to the Superintendent of Public Instruction whether that person be a part of state SARB. So questions can kind of, I'm a state SARB member. If you ever have questions about the process or what's on the agendas or what you'd like to see included, you can always contact other state SARB members to get that addressed for you. It requires that state SARB meets at least 4 times per year, quarterly. As a state SARB, we make recommendations annually to the superintendent of public instruction. A lot of times those recommendations are turned into kind of proposals for legislation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we make those recommendations. And we propose uniform guidelines or other means to achieve the goals related to attendance. So one of the functions of state SARB is to update that state SARB handbook. When there's new legislation that comes through or new pieces that are going to impact the process, we want to make sure that that information is updated and readily available for people. In terms of specifically what Ed Code says about state SARB, it's to encourage the cooperation, coordination, and development of strategies to support county SARBs, diverts pupils from the juvenile justice system, reduces duplication of the services of state and county agencies, and reduce dropouts by promoting interagency collaboration. So at the state SARB level, for those of you that are used to SARB as the meeting, state SARB doesn't conduct student cases. They're not hearing student cases and talking about attendance at the state level. This is really providing guidance and technical support to county SARBs and local SARBs about what best practices are and how to reduce truancy and chronic absenteeism throughout the state. County SARBs, the code is listed below. With a county SARB, their responsibilities are to establish any and all local SARBs within the county, review the organizational structure of the local SARBs, develop rules and regulations, provide technical assistance, and collect and analyze data from the annual SARB report. In Kern County, do you guys currently have a county SARB? No? Okay. So you're going to fall down here. So here's the thing. County offices who do have a county SARB, and this is something that could change. So although you don't have a county SARB that's functioning right now, and they've basically turned that authority over to you as the local SARBs, it could be that in the future, especially with the focus on attendance, it could be that a county SARB is created. So this is happening across the state because of this focus, the accountability indicators, the data, the dashboard, all of those kinds of things. So it could be in the near future that Kern ends up having a county SARB. If that was the case, they would help with making an inventory of community resources, which you already do, making recommendations for the improvement of resources and programs. County SARB would have the option to review requests for legal action from the local SARBs. Some county SARBs who are in place, you have one in a neighboring county in Kings County, they actually do look at and review student cases. In other counties, it's purely for technical guidance and support. So if Kern went that direction, I'm not sure which direction it would go, but it could be that they hear cases, or it could be that they keep that with the local SARBs and focus on that guidance and technical support. Okay, local SARBs, so this is you guys. This is what you're doing in your districts. With a SARB, you can maintain a SARB within just your district, or if you chose to do a consortium model, where maybe you have smaller districts that are geographically located close to each other, you could combine those into a consortium. Local SARBs help to enforce compulsory ed laws, develop coordinated services between the school, community, and home, recommend solutions for school attendance and behavior issues, and refer families. So in your case, you're going to refer families from your local SARBs. When we look at SARB and the process and what it looks like, again, we need to focus on the process. It's not just the SARB meeting, it's everything leading up to it. So prevention, early identification, intervention, and then the intensive piece. So we're going to go through these and talk about what this could look like. And from this lens, when we're talking about it this afternoon, again, Tier 1 and Tier 2 are heavily focused on the school site level, because Tier 3 is the really intensive interventions, and that's where SARB gets involved, and that's more of a district function. So when we're talking about Tiers 1 and 2, I really want to spend a little more time talking about best practices and activities at the school site level. So district people, if you can think still about your job at the district, but kind of also think back to your time at a school site and what some of those activities might look like. So Tier 1 is prevention. Prevention is how you set the foundation. how you promote attendance, which we talked about as duty number 1. So you're going to see how some of the duties of attendance supervisors fit in with these tiers. It also promotes school connectedness and positive school climate, and these activities are directed at all stakeholders across the board. So this is students, families, staff, community members, everybody. So again, there's going to be some crossover between what we talked about this morning about raising awareness and then this prevention piece, because we're setting that foundation. So for policies and procedures, here are some things that I would like for you to think about, consider when we're talking about policies and procedures. At the site levels, make sure that you are reviewing attendance-related forms, flyers, and brochures. So even today, the brochure that Sal had, make sure you have the updated versions of those materials to give to parents, because contact information, names, phone numbers, all that stuff changes very quickly. So make sure that you're reviewing things. Also make sure that you're in compliance, because when laws change, we need to make sure that our paperwork and information that we send out reflects that. Also at the site level, reviewing attendance taking codes with staff on an annual basis is very important. We talked about that data piece and the issue with data. When data is incorrectly input into our system, then we get back information that's not clean. So we need to make sure that we're clear about the codes, how we're assigning those absences, and what we're looking at. And if that means some additional support for people who are responsible for that, if you have some attendance clerks who need some additional training or help, think about that. Review it with your teachers to make sure, because they're the ones inputting information as well, that they're clear about the codes, and your substitutes too. Address how to correct errors and inconsistencies in attendance with your staff. So people make mistakes. There's human error. Maybe a student came in late, they marked them absent, but the student really came in late. Make sure that everybody knows how to fix those human errors. If something's brought to your attention, make sure that you have a way to resolve that. Developing internal systems for students working with agency and community partners. So we were talking about this earlier at the school site. So our friend here from CPS, if there are people from agencies that come in and need to meet with students, sometimes they're meeting with students on your campuses. So if they pull them out to have a meeting with them, especially if you're in the middle or high school areas where you have multiple periods and multiple teachers, they might get pulled out during second period and stay with their social worker through third period. Well, your third period teacher is going to mark them absent, right? Because they never showed up to class. But if you don't have an internal system in place for that social worker to be able to let the school know they were with that student through third period, that student could get marked, it could remain an absent. So you have to have those systems in place to be able to address those kinds of things that happen. Schedule time during faculty meetings to share data and discuss progress towards your attendance goals, and include attendance information for parents at school meetings and on websites. So specific information you would want to share under this are things like, how do you clear an absence? If you're a parent, are you making phone calls? Are you providing notes? What's the timeline for doing that? Do you have 48 hours? Do you have 72 hours? Be explicit about what those expectations are. So this is part of setting that foundation. Establishing expectations. So through LCAP and through the initiatives that we have in our districts, we have attendance goals. We need to make sure that it's not just the superintendent and the board who know what the attendance goals are. That needs to filter down to everybody, including your teachers, including your support staff on campus, including your students and your families. Everybody should know what that is. So developing and displaying site-level attendance goals on a regular basis. There's lots of ways to do that. Use your social media, use your websites. Send home back to school letters focusing on attendance. So principals who are in the room at the start of the school year, sending home with the packet of everything else you send, having that letter. Attendance is very important. It's a priority for us. Our attendance goals are X, Y, and Z. This is parents how you can help us. But send that letter home at the beginning of the year. If you have any kind of campaign, slogan, put all of that marketing with that letter. One of the strategies I'm doing actually this week is with one of the people we work with, first day of school is Wednesday. I know you guys are like, we've already been in school for 3 weeks, but they're starting school on Wednesday. So because kindergarten is such an issue on the elementary campus, I am gonna go with my school t-shirt and stand at the kindergarten entrance and greet the parents who are walking their babies to school on the first day with the attendance slogan, "Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you being here. Let's have a great year. By the way, Mom, Dad, take a look at this." And I am personally handing attendance flyers to every parent who walks in with their kindergartner. So here's a copy if you want to take a look at what that looks like. Kind of accomplishes a couple things. One, starts like a face-to-face welcome, we're glad you're here. Friendly face coming in the first day. I'll try to be friendly. The second thing is the messaging. It's constant and it's personal. It's not a phone call. It's not just a letter without a personal handshake, welcome, we're glad you're here, trying to put a face to that as well. Building in attendance is a component of other programs that promote positive school climate, so like a PBIS program, ASB, leadership, build that in. Especially at the high school level, you have a ton of different activities that you can build attendance in with. Use your link crew, use your ASB, use your leadership classes, use all of those things to get them behind the attendance movement that you're doing. And then again, the tracking calendar is a good tool. I think someone must have liked it so much they kept it because it stopped rotating. If you have it, please continue to rotate. You can take it at the end, I promise. But those are some different things in terms of establishing expectations, because you're not just talking about what your goals are, but here's how we expect that you're going to carry those out. Questions about that? Anything else that you guys do in terms of establishing expectations at the start of the year? Since you guys already started your year, you're a couple weeks in. Anything else that you did to establish your expectations? Okay, we're in the after lunch food coma mode. Okay. Promoting positive attendance. So again, cite people. Here's some activities you could think about. Some of these we've heard already. Daily, weekly attendance announcements. I liked something that you guys set over here as a table where every morning in the announcements, you announce the attendance from the previous day, correct? So here's our attendance goal. Here's where we landed. And that gets communicated to kids every day as part of the announcements.
And then we also give out shout-outs. So like the class with 100%, we give them a shout-out.
Okay.
And the kids feel happy that they're class one, and then at the end of the week, we have grade level champions. There you go.
Now the other nice thing that they do is they do that at the schools, but then on the district website, they also promote like the schools with the best attendance, yes. Right?
So at our website, if you go to our website, Wellsville Union Elementary School District, you'll see John L. Pruitt. They won first place in attendance. They're attendance champions for the week. And then you have the rest of our schools posted on there too with their percentage.
Okay, so that's a way to promote attendance, a little competition, a little shout out.
And they get a flag too that they could fly across, fly on their flagpole.
Okay, so you can do that too. So promoting positive attendance, they also talked about a door magnet, like so the school, the class with the best.
They get a door magnet, and it's not something that's really expensive. The door magnet's about this big, but it gives the rest of the students a visual aid as far as who won. So Ms. Martinez won for the past 2 weeks. Ms. Correa is going to be really upset because her class is falling behind. So now we get the competition between the teachers, and we're able to build that into a positive.
But the nice thing is everybody that walks by that classroom too sees the door magnet. So it's not just that you announce it on the intercom, but any kids who are walking to lunch or going to the bathroom or doing whatever, if they walk by and they see the door magnet that you're the attendance winner for that week, it's just, again, promoting positive attendance and a little bit of peer pressure kinds of things. Attendance pledges, we talked about that. Door decorating or poster contests, that's something that you could do. I saw something, one of the handouts that Sal brought had to do with a poster contest. So that's another way to promote, let the kids really be creative and decide what that door decorating or poster contest looks like. Sometimes stuff that's the student generated is the best. It makes the most sense to them. We as adults have our ideas of what appeals to kids. They have a much better idea of what appeals to them, so give them a chance to do that. Promoting attendance through other class projects, so you could do it through art class. I've seen some really creative drama and video production, so at the high school level, if you have those kinds of classes, to be able to have them put together like a public service announcement or something that could be used at parent meetings or could run on local like cable access TV. So again, let your kids be creative. Class or grade level competitions, attendance competitions between schools in a district, the 100% days. So this was an idea that you basically do based on data. So you go back and you look at your data from the previous year. You look at where your dips in the data were. Where do the dips tend to happen? Fridays, before holidays, before vacations, sometimes random days in the middle, like Halloween, like the day after Halloween, you tend to kind of have a little dip in attendance, right? Because everyone's recovering from a late night and lots of sugar. So take a look at where your data was from the year before and identify the days where you had those dips in data. And then calendar those as your 100% attendance days. So you can advertise them, it's not a secret. You advertise them out to people, put it on your marquee, do the phone callers home, tell the kids a week ahead and say, look, on Friday, before we go on break, we're doing a 100% day. If 100% of the kids can be here, we have perfect attendance across the school. The incentive is going to be whatever you come up with, X, Y, Z. Could be a DJ at lunchtime, could be, you know, a popsicle party sponsored by your PTA, could be whatever you can come up with. So the thing is, if you get 100% on that day, that's going to be phenomenal incentives. The kids are going to like it. Your staff's going to be excited and motivated about it. But even if you don't hit 100%, if you hit like 98%, it's probably way better than the 94% that you would have had otherwise. So it's really being intentional about looking at your data and plugging in activities that will support attendance improvement on those days. So that's another idea. Social media drawings, incentives. Here's some examples of different things I've seen. T-shirts, giveaways, free dress, dances, musics, field trips. You were talking about field trips as well. And we've worked with people where we've been able to get donations from like Starbucks or something like that, where for teachers with perfect attendance for that month, they would do at a faculty meeting, you know, a drawing for Starbucks. Everyone loves Starbucks, so start like a $25 Starbucks gift card. There are different ways you could do that if you want to incentivize your staff as well, because part of it is setting a good example, right? It's modeling that. When kids are seeing that their teachers are out of class all the time for different things, then it's kind of hard to turn around and say, well, you need to be here every day and on time. So if we can model that, that's good. Another example would be if you have uniforms in your district, you know, after a while kids get really done wearing uniforms. They're tired of their polos and their khakis or whatever. So you could do t-shirts with your campaign slogan and allow kids to wear them as long as they're in the school colors as an alternative to your, you know, required dress code. So that's an option. That's one of the things I put up there as well. So just thinking about how to be creative with this. It doesn't have to cost a ton of money. I mean, you can do things that are like front of the line pass for the cafeteria. It doesn't cost any money. You know, you can plug a phone into a speaker and have music at lunchtime if that's something that's an incentive for your kids. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but if you can partner with somebody who can assist you with some of these bigger things, then that's always fun to do. And that's why I like the more intermittent prizes, because if you're looking at like a year-long incentive, like a car kind of thing, I can see where that works, or even by semester. But if you do something that's more frequent than that, one of the schools we work with, they do like scholar dollars. So when kids do good things, they get these little paper tickets that they can exchange for, I don't know, it's like Chuck E. Cheese, like you exchange a certain number of tickets for a prize. They do that every week. So they do it based on attendance. So if a kid has a rough week with attendance and doesn't get a scholar dollar that week, okay, well then they're not able to accumulate those. But the next week starts over again. So they're able to be a part of that. If you do monthly type activities, then a student might get really sick one month and be out 3 or 4 days, but the next month they have good attendance. So I would say it's great if you have like a couple really long-term, year-long, semester-long things that can promote perfect attendance. But if you can also find ways to just promote good attendance, then you'll capture more kids. If you can do like the monthly, weekly.
It was a combination of both of those. So,
Okay.
for example, there was a unit by unit or month to month secondary prize. So like every month, kids were winning something, like for positive attendance. So if you didn't have perfect attendance and say you're in month 2, and you had perfect attendance in month 2, then your name was in the hat for those secondary prizes. And the secondary prizes were pretty good. They were PlayStations. Some of them were just gift cards. It was just a bunch of different.
He's coming from San Bernardino County. Everyone's like, who's this guy? No, but see when we start like cross-pollinating across different places, you can get ideas from different areas as well. So, I mean, I would think to answer your question, something that addresses both the perfect, but also the positive attendance. So kids who might not be, and again, you may work with your kids, you may have a separate group like you were talking about monitoring your SARB kids. You may have someone who's assigned to doing the follow-up for SARB kids. You already know they've had a history of attendance problems. Getting them to come regularly is, I mean, you know, you just want to stand up and give them a round of applause every time they come. You may develop some kind of incentive program for just your former SARB kids and do something just for them. And for them, again, it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, it might be, you know, it has to build towards something because it hasn't been a habit of theirs to be in school every day and on time. So working with them for that. In terms of educating parents, so some of the things that we've talked about, we talked a little earlier, again, going back to duty number 1, but attendance messaging at orientation meetings for kindergartners and new students, addressing attendance at a lot of different events, back to school night, open house, literacy night, math night, figure out how to incorporate attendance into those kinds of things. Encourage the PTA to support attendance activities. PTAs on campus can be powerful. It's parents talking to parents. It's people who have time to be able to assist you and help out with these activities. If you can get your PTA on board, and the California PTA is represented on state SARB. So it is something that PTA is aware of. It's figuring out how to link your people in your community in with what the state PTA is already doing. Ask teachers to share attendance data during parent-teacher conferences. So when you're talking about your student, how they're progressing academically, behaviorally, socially, make sure that attendance is part of that too. Because the interesting thing is sometimes parents will receive information about attendance better from a teacher than they will from anyone else. Because the teacher is the person who has the relationship with the student. They'll pick up the call for the teacher, but they won't pick up the call from the automated attendance office, right? So figuring out how to really get your teachers invested in this process and message for you. Look at when, you know, if a student misses 2 or 3 days in a row, that teacher should be calling home and saying, hey, we missed you. What's going on? Is there anything we can help you with? Again, it can't just be the responsibility of the attendance clerk or the administrator. Teachers are the front lines. So you may have to take a look at your contracts. I don't want to like step on any toes here or get crazy with any union contracts about what people's responsibilities are, or how much you can ask them to do outside of their regular day, but thinking about how to utilize teachers in that fashion. Sharing attendance information with parent groups, discussing morning and evening routines to help with attendance. This is a big one with families. Kids are always running in late because they couldn't figure out where stuff was. There's a lot of disorganization in the morning. Talking with parents about backup plans for emergencies. As attendance clerks or people that work in the offices, you hear this all the time. There was an emergency, the car broke down, we had no way to get to school, something happened with public transportation. So helping them figure out, okay, what's the backup plan? If the car breaks down, are you able to take public transportation? Do you have a neighbor that can help you? Do you have another family member that can help you? Can you call an Uber? I mean, I don't know, I'm trying to be creative, a taxi, something in the event that there's an emergency instead of the student staying home all day. What's the backup plan? Do you have a buddy at school? Something that can help with that. Teaching parents how to access the parent portals to monitor attendance. So if you have this through your student information system, sometimes parents forget their passwords, they forget how to use the system, they aren't used to using it. So helping them with that, that's also a good activity during a parent-teacher conference to sit down and say, Have the teacher say, okay, let's have you open up the parent portal so that we're talking about the same thing. Show me how you're accessing it and so that we can look at the same information. If the parent doesn't know how to do that, then that's a teachable moment. Let's fix that so we do know how. And then talking about or conducting meetings with absentees from the previous year, you've mentioned that. Community partners, you also want to make sure some of these people that you're reaching out to, a lot of you may already have developed relationships, but here are some examples of other ones that you want to think about. One really helpful one, and because depending on what district you're from and how close you are to like Bakersfield, Cal State Bakersfield, if you have access to anybody who is needing to do hours for any kind of program, whether it's a school counseling program, a social work program, any of those kinds of things, or whether as part of a class they're taking on campus, if they need to reach out and do some community work, this may be something that you want to consider in terms of bringing in interns or volunteers from local universities. Service organizations, faith-based organizations are great places to go in terms of support from the community. So again, when you're talking about this foundation level related to SARB, we want to make sure that those tier 1 prevention pieces are in there. We know what we're doing in terms of raising awareness, which again ties back to goal number 1. So we want to make sure that those pieces are included to set that foundation. The next part is early intervention, so tier 2. What we do when students start to have irregular attendance. These are kids who have already been addressed through your tier 1 prevention pieces. They've heard the messages. They understand what the expectations are. You've tried to work with the family so that they're clear about what needs to happen related to attendance, but you're still seeing that kids are absent. So this is the piece that we're looking at here. This is where the due process pieces really kind of start with the notifications, the conferences, the documentation. All of that kind of begins in this early intervention level. Also with this, making sure that you have the appropriate personnel in place to be able to address what you do find out and making sure that it's supportive. In this area, you want to make sure you're looking at data. So going back to duty number 2, when we're talking about how do we identify those patterns, what do we look at, what are our sources of information, we're going to be talking about that. Looking at barriers, so what are some of the factors that are contributing to this? And then the interventions. So how are we doing this? So really when you're looking at it, it goes back to these duties and goals of attendance supervisors. It fits pretty neatly with 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so you're going to kind of see how when this supervisors of attendance duties was developed, it was kind of developed with this SARB process in mind, with these tiers in mind. So data collection, we talked about this a little bit, using multiple measures to make sure that we're identifying what's going on with students. Chronic truancy, chronic absence, truancy, suspension, expulsion rates. We're looking at subgroup information. We're looking at various school sites, individual data, all of those kinds of things. So with the data collection, because we've already talked about that piece earlier this morning, we're going to kind of move on to the next part, but again, that's where you start with the identification. How do we find out who these kids are? I want to talk about the causes of poor attendance a little bit more. We have the factors over here that you guys listed, but some other additional things that we didn't have on this list over here would be things like homelessness, domestic violence. We can't underestimate what it is that kids are seeing in their homes or what they're exposed to. The trauma, we kind of talked about the trauma piece, but when we have kids who are either experiencing domestic violence at the hands of someone in their home or they're witnessing someone they care about being abused, that has a long-term effect on kids. And a lot of times the schools aren't aware of it because it's not being reported, right? Kids and families are private. Unless we're seeing something as a mandated reporter that we have to address, it's hard for us to always know what's going on in the homes. Involvement in the child welfare system. A lot of times we do have better information about this because we work with our agency partners who provide us with information as kids are coming and going out of our system. So we do have a sense of who they are. And then sexual exploitation. So human trafficking types of things, we're seeing that across the state. Health conditions, We talked about asthma, mental health problems, other issues that could come up, diabetes, dental issues. Oral health is a really significant factor in attendance. When we think about kids who are missing school because of dental pain or dental appointments, or those of you who are at the middle school level, you know how much school kids miss for orthodontics appointments, or you have your own kids who miss a lot because of that. So health concerns, health conditions, appointments, all of that play in as well. Transportation. So tell me a little bit about transportation concerns or issues in this area. Is that something that you struggle a lot with? How have you tried to resolve it?
Over in Eastern, we don't have any public transportation.
No public transportation.
So they walk and they can't afford their taxis.
Okay. That's a really big problem.
We have transportation, but the distance from the bus for some of our families are.
So the problem is getting to where the buses get them to school. Okay. Wow. So you're talking about, we have transportation issues that are the public transportation, like you're saying, lack of, or the distance issue, and then transportation provided by the school, but a cost associated with it, and it's prohibitive for some families. Okay, that's definitely a challenge. Work, sometimes, especially high school level, when you start to get kids into the work world or they need to help work to support their families. Sometimes what might start out as an after-school job with a valid work permit turns into something a whole lot more than that because a parent loses a job or there needs to be extra income for the family and the student feels responsible for doing that. That becomes a challenge as well. Teenage rebellion, probably even younger than teenage. A lot of elementary level, you're seeing rebellion at a whole different level. Drug or alcohol abuse. So this could be of the parents or of the students. Because again, if parents are having trouble with drug or alcohol abuse, sometimes that takes priority over everything, including getting their child to school. At the older levels, you may have kids who are abusing drugs and alcohol as well, and that's impacting them coming to school. Bullying, excessive discipline, not so much anymore. I think schools have done a pretty good job at kind of really beefing up their other means of correction, trying to work with students and families on campus and not overly suspending kids, but in the past that was an issue. And then parent decisions, we've talked about that, family vacations, and you know, I'm just gonna make the choice to take my child out of school. So all of those are causes of poor attendance, which in addition to the ones over here, we have to think about and figure out how do we address this. If a parent comes in and tells us, you know, it's an issue of taking care of family members, someone has to be at home, I have to work 2 jobs, someone has to be at home to watch the baby, how are we going to respond to that? Yes, it's against the law. Yes, it would be considered a truancy because it's not a valid reason for keeping a child at home. However, what can we do to help you address that? What resources are there available to assist you? Who else in your family is able to be there as a support system? Do you have programs in the local area that can help you? So we have to be able to address all of those kinds of things. In identifying and removing barriers, health concerns are a big piece. We've talked about that a lot. Identifying how we're going to work with that. One suggestion would be to try to secure medical releases from the family. So if they're stating that there's a medical issue, trying to get a medical release so that your school personnel, your health clerk, your school nurse can speak directly with the physician that's treating the student. Okay, that's the best means of communication, because sometimes what happens is parents will say, and I think we mentioned it over here, that there's a condition or there's a reason that the student is out, but there's no documentation. There's no treatment plan, there's no record of medication, there's nothing to be able to corroborate what the family is saying. So to come back and say, well, let's see if we can talk to your doctor and work out a plan and how can the school support you, that's a good way to help get information. Sometimes it may lead to the creation of something like a health plan. Sometimes you'll never get that medical release back and you'll never allow you to talk to anyone. But it's worth the try and can be really helpful. Transportation and safety, so identifying that as an issue. Some safety things are more localized. So for example, if students are having to walk to school and there's a certain neighborhood that they have a fear about walking through, whether because it's just generally unsafe or because maybe they have an affiliation with a group that doesn't like another group, and there are safety concerns that way, addressing that. So you may institute something like a safe passage program or a buddy system or something to help kids get through that. Bigger safety concerns, like the Parkland situation, kind of have to be addressed in a different way, but talking about what plans you have on campus in the event of something horrible like that happening here locally. In some cases, you may need to look at 504 special education eligibility based on what information you have about the student. For homeless students, think about some of the barriers related to them coming to school. It could be food, clothing, transportation. With foster youth, thinking about the enrollment issues. Even though we have immediate enrollment for foster youth, we know that when students are transitioning from one placement to another, sometimes those placement changes take time and enrollment is not as immediate as we would like for it to be. And there are also a lot of family dynamics going on with kids who are in the foster care system. So trying to deal with family visits, with court visits, with meeting with social workers, all of that ends up playing into attendance issues as well. So how can we kind of work through that? And you made a comment about trying to kind of change procedures or protocols with the social workers meeting with the kids, maybe after school hours or at times that wouldn't impact them, right?
Right, that would create less of an impact on them missing curriculum.
Okay, so hopefully that continues. If that's kind of in progress, hopefully that's something that will help minimize the amount of time out of class as well. Okay, excused absences. So I just want to review this really quickly to be clear about what the excused absences and unexcused absences are. Illness, this is a fairly common one. I think people are used to seeing all the time. Quarantine doesn't happen as often, but when it does, it's under the direction of a county or city health officer, so there would be communication between that agency and the school. Appointments, attending the funeral service of an immediate family member. Education code does say 1 day if the service is in California and 3 days if the service is out of state. There's a little bit of challenge with this one because, as you can imagine, if you're flying like across the country to attend a service, you're probably spending 2 days of that time in transit. So I know that that's a challenge. We get a lot of pushback from families about this one because even the 1 day in state, if it's an immediate family member, if it's a parent, a grandparent who passes away, a sibling, is 1 day really, is that really going to happen? Is that realistic? 5 is jury duty. So for our high school people, you have 18-year-olds who could potentially get called to jury duty, just like our friend Brian. He's waiting to get a call. Illness or medical appointment of a child of whom the pupil is the custodial parent. Again, for, I shouldn't just say high school, could be middle school or even younger. If you have teen parents who need to take their child to an appointment, they have an excused absence to be able to take their child. Other than that, because you'll have parents come in a lot who say, like grown adult parents who say, I have an appointment, I'm taking my child out to go with me to the appointment, that is not an excused absence. But if you have a teen parent who needs to take their child to an appointment, their absence can be excused as well, okay? Justifiable personal reasons, again, a really long, convoluted definition. This covers a lot of different areas. The one thing I want to call your attention to is when the absence is requested in writing by the parent or guardian, approved by the principal or designee. So this is something that you should be aware of ahead of time. It's not intended to be a, well, I left for 2 weeks, and now I'm going to come back and ask you if it's okay to excuse it after the fact. That's not what this is intended to be. So as part of that parent education piece, when you're holding those parent attendance meetings, make sure that they're clear about what this looks like and how this can play out. Serving as a member of a precinct board, this is your high school kids kind of learning the civic duty and election process. These 2 pieces right here are ones that have been added more recently. So thinking to your student handbook or your annual notification, do you have these reasons included? No? Some saying no, some saying yes. Okay. Yay. There's a lot of yeses. I'm very happy because people are still struggling, especially with this one, because this was just added a couple years ago. To explain this one, spending time with a member of the pupil's immediate family who is an active duty member of the uniformed services. So this could be someone who is being deployed, someone who is home on leave, or someone who has just returned from like an active duty assignment. The idea is to kind of allow the family to reintegrate. This was something that was brought forward in San Diego because of a lot of military bases down there and trying to figure out how to do that. What it does say is that the superintendent of the school district will determine the number of days that will be excused. So what is that number in your districts? For those of you that said this is in your handbook, what's that number of days?
It's up to the principal of the site.
So the superintendent has designated that to the principal of the site. Okay. So the interesting thing is, for whatever reason, they didn't want to put a number of days on this. They wanted to leave it to the discretion of school districts. When this piece of legislation was put forward, the recommendation was 3 days. They ended up taking it out of the language because they wanted more flexibility and local control. But if you're not aware of what this number of days would be, you may want to highlight this or circle it and think about it, because you should have some consistency with that. Number 10, for the purpose of attending the pupil's naturalization ceremony to become a U.S. citizen. This was added July 25th of 2016. Again, a lot of places I go visit have not included this in the handbook or the annual notification. They haven't updated this information, so make sure it's there and communicate that out to your attendance clerks. Make sure they all know that these, especially the last 2 reasons, are excused absences as well. Okay? So just as a refresher, and again, if you're doing parent presentations, make sure that parents are clear about what the excused absences are, and conversely, what they are not. Because there's a lot of things that aren't in here. And sometimes parents are under the assumption of, I called in or I sent a note, so it's excused. That's not how it works, and that's part of the education piece that we need to remind them about. Ed Code tells us very specifically what we can work with. There are a few ways to have some flexibility, but Disneyland, family vacations, we've heard this over and over again from families, like, well, my student did really well, they have good grades, so missing a day or 2 or like taking them to do something fun because they got good grades isn't a big deal. Well, you're kind of mixing the messages when you're talking about, like, we're really excited to celebrate how well you're doing in school, let's take you out, right? Kind of sends the wrong message. So also talking with parents about just kind of how they treat school and the importance of school and the priority of that, especially in those circumstances. And kids can be really, I'm trying to think of a nicer word than the word I want to use. Kids can sometimes be very creative in how they work with their parents and try to get what they want. So that's one way that, you know, I've heard that over and over again was, well, they were doing so good, I wanted to reward them, we had a special day and I took them out of school. So we don't want to do that. A couple of other areas where excused absences fit in addition to the 10 that we talked about. For pupils in grades 7 through 12, school authorities can excuse a pupil from the school for the purpose of obtaining confidential medical services without the consent of the pupil's parent or guardian. So middle school, high school level, if they are out receiving confidential medical services, then those absences can be excused. Okay, that's in a different part of Ed Code, but I wanted to include it. And then the entertainment work permits as well. If you'll read through that code, it'll explain that a little bit more. One thing I wanted to bring up, because a lot of times we focus very heavily on the excuses that I just talked about, but this threw a wrench into things a few years ago, and I'm not sure how aware everybody is of this. So what AB 2616 said, this was in 2012, so 6 years ago, was that for the purposes of truancy provisions, a valid excuse includes all the things we just talked about and may include other reasons that are within the discretion of school administrators, and based on the facts of the pupil's circumstances are deemed to constitute a valid excuse. So that basically means that as of 6 years ago, you are allowed to have administrative discretion. In addition to the things that we just talked about for excused absences, the California legislature gave you the authority and flexibility to have administrative discretion. So keep in mind, it has to be at the discretion of school administrators. So this isn't an attendance clerk or an office manager or a teacher making that decision, it's a school administrator. But what are some of the challenges that come with that? Consistency. What else? Anything else? Tell me what you mean by consistency. Give me an example.
So one administrator could think that having to go get your nails done is,
Around prom time, right?
and another may not. So you're going to have two families having, same situation, but two different
Outcomes. Okay, yes.
I think of when we have folks that have their kids out of school on excessive excused, and some administrators might require a doctor's note or verification from the doctor's office.
Okay.
And other principals may not.
Okay.
Or they may require some families to provide it at the same school and not others.
Okay.
And I don't know if that scenario fits in here.
It's a little different than this one. I mean, there is a verification process in terms of how you're supposed to verify those absences. It should be, your board policy typically lays that out. And in a lot of places, I think it's because of the CSBA example. There's a line in there that talks about like when a student reaches 14 days of absence, then after that point, they must bring a doctor's note. People have adjusted that. Some districts have just taken the CSBA and lived with that language. Other people have adjusted it to like 10 days or 8 days or whatever. But it still goes back to the verification piece. So that's still a little bit of a challenge. The issues I see with this have to do with what are the examples of administrative discretion? Like what would count and what wouldn't? So does being late on public transportation count? But a parent whose car broke down, does that count? Does, how do you determine ahead of time what some of those examples might be? And unless you like sit down as a district and brainstorm every possible scenario and say yay or nay, it's going to be really difficult to maintain that consistency. So that can be a challenge. Knowing the family ahead of time and knowing who they are and talking with them and having open communication about what those different practices may be or what those special holidays may be, you'd want to know that ahead of time. Consistency, you talked about consistency. The other thing that came up to me is administrator shopping. Kids and parents are very savvy, so I think I should be excused for this, so I'm going to go to Erin because she has more likelihood of saying yes than Brian does. And the kids are real kids know, kids start to figure stuff out. Parents may have a certain relationship with one administrator over another administrator. It can turn into, if you're only one administrator at the site, you're good. If you have multiple administrators, that can be a bigger issue. Also, what you said in terms of consistency, the other example that I give with this is what happens if, for example, it's a bus-related transportation issue. Bus breaks down, kids are late for school. So what if you have a family with 3 kids? One's elementary, one's middle, one's high school. They're on the same bus broke down, they're all late, but the 3 kids go into their 3 separate schools and one administrator says, okay, I'll excuse you. The other one says, no, I won't. And the third one says, okay, I'll excuse you. Now you have the same parent with 3 kids in 3 schools with 2 different answers. So for the consistency's sake of the district, you want to be very concise in terms of how you would apply this. Now the language does say may include. You do not have to add this administrative discretion. It says it may include other reasons. So if you as a district decide to hold the line and say we're sticking with what's in ed code, you can do that. If you want to allow for the discretion, it does give you that option to do so. So just so that you're aware of that. The verification piece, this talks about the California Code of Regulations, verification. It does talk about the quarantine piece too. Your policy can include verification of illness by a public or a school or public health nurse, a physician, or attendance supervisor. So a lot of times you'll hear this at SARB. Your student has already missed too much school. At this point, if they miss any more school, you need to bring a note from a doctor, or you need to bring the student to school to have the illness verified by an administrator, attendance supervisor, nurse, whatever the case is. This is where that comes from. Medical and mental health issues, chronic health plans we've talked about, the mental health pieces, the ongoing training for staff. So thinking about potential mental health concerns, lots of kids with depression and anxiety at this point. Think about that avoidance behavior, how kids might be avoiding school to stay away from certain types of things, and the trauma-related issues. Again, kids who are witnessing domestic violence, kids who are witnessing drug and alcohol abuse, divorces, separations, lots of different things that kids go through can impact them in terms of trauma. Linking them to school-based and community-based resources is critical, and then also that evaluation component again. Okay, school site interventions. So you've identified who the kids are, you know what some of the barriers are. What does it look like when you start to actually intervene, and what are examples of those interventions? These are some of the different activities that you can do to reach out when you've known that there's irregular attendance. Your truancy notifications, we'll get to that and talk about that a little more detail. Chronic absence notifications. How many of you send out excessive excused absence notifications? Awesome. So in the past, we focused so much on the truancy piece that what happens with all of those kids who had excused absences? They might have 15 absences, but they were all excused. We need to be messaging that and talking about that as well. So I'm glad that a lot of you are doing that already. Phone calls, home visits, parent-teacher conferences, counseling, mentoring, tutoring, referrals to school-based services. If you have truancy prevention programs, whether it's through probation or the district attorney's office, and then pre-SARB meetings. A lot of times they're referred to as SARTs. So these are all things in terms of the process leading up to SARB that you need to show as a school site staff that you have intervened with the family and made those efforts. We know that you've pulled data, we know that you've known what the factors are, but now what are you doing about it? So you need to be able to show that these different components are happening. And it may look different site to site. One site may have a community liaison and an outreach intervention person, and that's the person that handles it. At another site, it might just be the administrator. At another site, it may be the SRO helping with some of this work. So it's going to look different place to place, but these are some of the different activities that should be happening. Is there anything else that's not on this list that are interventions that you guys implement? Yes?
We do truancy orientation, so once the students reach at least a minimum of step 2, we'll go out to school sites in the evening. Parents are sent a letter. And so a district team will go out to the school site and we'll give about a 45-minute long presentation about this is what can happen if the truancy continues.
Okay.
If your student continues in the school, what the statistics say, how you can help, like regular bedtime, so on and so forth. And we have our truancy officers speak, our interventionists speak.
Good.
And we invite the site truancy contacts to be a part of the conversation as well.
Are those group meetings or are they?
Yeah, it's a big group meeting. So
Like,
I mean, we went to
a
one
lot?
school where we had 3 families come, but there were only 30 letters that were sent out. And
Okay.
then you go to another site where you have over 100 families come.
Okay,
It just depends on the location in Bakersfield.
good. Okay, so that's part of it, the truancy interventions and working that way. That's awesome. Anything else? And sometimes if you have these partnerships like this truancy prevention program, in some places you may have your district attorney and probation people who assist with some of those activities where they actually come out. They send letters out on their letterhead. They have people from their departments come out and do those presentations as well. So this can happen with agency partners in addition to the school staff. Anything else in terms of interventions or things that you do beyond this? Yeah.
We do make referrals to parent project as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, when it comes from our office, it's usually at SARB. But
Right.
we refer to sites to do that, so parent project or parent meeting.
Okay. And parent project with a specific focus on attendance, or just we're really wanting to focus on the entire parenting piece?
The entire, because so much more comes out of
Right.
about what's going on.
Okay.
It's not just an attendance issue.
And in some places, especially when you're getting to the high school level, a lot of the kids aren't coming to school is either as a result of years and years and years of having poor attendance and it just becoming habit. That could be a big part of what happens at the high school level, or also we hear, the students have just kind of parents have completely lost control of their kids. Whatever influences, peer influences, neighborhood influences are happening, and they've just completely lost control. The parents are on board, they're trying to work with the school, they come to every meeting, they do everything they're supposed to do, but getting their kids even to come home at night is a challenge. So we see that end too. So that's where Parent Project could be helpful with helping regain some of that. So truancy notifications. These are the different pieces that are required as part of the process. Some of you get this done automatically through like an A2A type program or other software out there that looks at sending that information out. Can save some time, save some energy of people at your school sites, but there are some mandated pieces in there. So with the first truancy notification, Ed Code 48260.5 specifically outlines the information that has to be included in that truancy notification. Sometimes when parents get that, it sounds really harsh because there's stuff in there about fines and punishment and imprisonment and taking driver's licenses and all this stuff, which is really fun when you're doing an elementary school and they're like, what is revoking a driver's license? They're 5. So there's pieces like that that are in there, but again, some of that language is mandated by the education code. Because the letters appeared to be really harsh and sometimes kind of put parents off, what some districts have gone to is a kinder, gentler version of the truancy notification that still includes the mandated information, but does so in a way that has a kinder intro or a kinder conclusion about how we can help and how we want to support and how we want a successful year, and includes something that's more aligned to, the messaging of the school. But with that, it's still the truancy notification. And if you go back to what we talked about this morning, parents are required to be notified if their child is in violation of compulsory education law. That's the truancy notification. That's why we need to do it. The second is the subsequent report of truancy. The Ed Code is listed there for you. You're continuing with all of your school site interventions and including that information as well. And then the third truancy notification is the identification as a habitual truant. And again, you have to have that conscientious effort to have held a conference prior to designating a student as an habitual truant. Again, making the effort, documenting, even if it's not successful, you've made the conscientious effort to do those things. So this is part of the due process pieces that you need to make sure are in place and are happening. For some of you, again, you're using a system that automates that for you, so those notices just go out. You don't have to think about it or worry about it. In those systems, it will kind of trigger a response for the school sites, like you need to do a conference, you need to close a conference, you need to make those interventions. But this is part of the process leading up to SARB. Yes? So these are just the truancy notifications. A lot of districts are also going to the excessive excused absence notifications, and so like I know A2A includes that as part of the services that they provide, so they also send excessive excused absence letters out. They have a little bit different language, but that's also a notification piece. These are the ones that right now are part of education code that are kind of formalized in there. As a best practice, people are adding the excessive excused notifications, but as of right now, it's not required, but it's definitely best practice. The truancy are the mandated pieces, yes, but best practice is definitely to include the excessive excused as well, because then you're missing a whole group of kids, right? And the thing is, we are held accountable now as districts and schools for chronic absenteeism. If they have a note, great. If they tell us why they were absent, great. It still ultimately counts against us in terms of our chronic absenteeism rates. So we have to go from, I think for a long time, for those of us who've been in education for a long time, the message used to be just bring in a note, just bring in a note, just tell us why you were absent, just let us know, just excuse it. That used to be the focus. Now it's retraining parents and families that it's not bring in the note, it's be in the seat. The excused part of it is great, and it may help with this piece, but it doesn't make up for the lost instructional time. It doesn't fix our numbers. It doesn't help with our data. Home visits, these are particularly useful for parents with whom communication has been challenging. It's very easy for a parent to not pick up a phone call or to throw a letter in the trash. It's much more difficult if you're standing on their doorstep for them to turn you away. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's more difficult. The nice thing about home visits is that getting to see a chance of what the home environment looks like will tell you a completely different story. You'll see probably the number of people living in the home, what the conditions are, is there any kind of food insecurity, are there any health or wellness issues that are happening, are there other family members who are in need of care, and that care may be impacting whether the kids are coming to school. It also gives us a chance to get updated contact information. Sometimes part of the reason we can't get hold of parents is because the information we have on file is from 2 phone numbers ago. So if we're seeing someone in person at their home, we can get updated contact information. It allows us to outreach to other family members. So maybe we've been going after the mom and trying to call the mom, but the mom leaves at 5 in the morning to go to work. It's grandma we got to talk to, because grandma is the one that's got to get them up and get them out of the house. So it allows us to outreach to more people as a result of that. And it demonstrates that the school's reaching out, that caring and connectedness. With parent conferences, making sure that we're talking about an update of students' attendance. As a site administrator for a long time, whenever a student came into my office for anything, the first 3 things I looked at were grades, attendance, and behavior. Okay? If they came in for a discipline issue, yes, I'm going to address the discipline issue, but I'm also going to look at your grades, and I'm also going to look at your attendance. Because to me, those are the 3 things that gave me a pretty well-rounded picture of where you were and what was going on with you. So every opportunity you have as a site person, look at those things, encourage your teachers to do the same thing, to talk about not just something in isolation like academics, but also talk about attendance and behavior. Recognizing excellent, good, or improved attendance, expressing concern when there are problems, showing parents how to use those parent portals. So again, the parent conferences can kind of reinforce those pieces. Parent conferences may also look different in different places. We've talked about kind of group conferences related to truancy. They might be one-on-one individual conferences. They might be with a parent, with a teacher. They might be with an administrator. It's going to look different place to place. But the common things about what you should talk about, what are key talking points, are kind of this. So if you're wanting to train teachers on how do you talk about attendance, there's good information on attendance works. It's in your flash drive. But here are some other things that you would want to do. Doesn't take a whole lot of time, but you can get a lot of information. Okay, so now I want to talk about SARB meetings and conducting effective SARB meetings. These are the meetings that take place before the SARB. This is when you're trying to get information about what's going on with the student. You may already have some information just by having talked to the family or doing a home visit, but if attendance is not improving, then it kind of, you need to have a more intensive, structured conversation about what's happening. In the SARB meetings, you're talking about what's going on, what the problem is, and trying to figure out how to solve it. Again, the focus is on problem solving rather than punishment. You're trying to encourage everybody to discuss, have frank conversations, really get to the bottom of what's going on. In this meeting, making sure everyone coming from like a strengths-based approach is probably going to get you a little bit farther than coming from a, we're here to lecture you or punish you based on what you've already done. In terms of the SARB meetings, relevant people who could be at the table and work with you, administrators, students, teachers, attendance clerks, nurses, parents, counselors, could be psychologists, could be community liaisons, could be intervention specialists, could be a lot of different people. You don't necessarily need to have all of these people at every meeting, but the more robust your team is, the more resources they're going to be able to bring to the table. If you know ahead of time what the barriers or issues are, make sure that you have the appropriate people there. For example, if you know that there's a parent who's saying, my child has asthma, then you're going to want a health clerk or a school nurse there, because there may be questions that need to be asked about treatment plans and medication and what's going on with that student that as an administrator, as an attendance clerk, you might not know how to ask. So you want to make sure that you have appropriate people there for each of the meetings. As you're in the SARB meeting, sometimes you'll get questions about, well, what am I supposed to do in a SARB meeting? Shouldn't I just tell them they shouldn't miss school? It has to get better. We're going to be monitoring you. Yes, those are important parts of the conversation, but there are also some additional pieces that we need to explore. So you're working with the family to address how to improve attendance. Part of that is going to be being very specific about what that improvement needs to look like. So just saying, I want your attendance to be better. Better is relative. Better is subjective to people. Some parents may have no issue with their child missing 2 days a month. We as school people have an issue with that, but some parents might not have an issue with that. So saying get better is just very vague. If you want to talk about specific goals, what are those goals? Okay, so if a student has been absent for 10 days up to that point in the school year, then you need to tell the parent, you know, we have 3 months left, 4 months left, 5 months left. Your student shouldn't miss any more school. They should have 0 more days of absence. Or no more than 1, no more than, I mean, whatever you want that to be, but be specific about what your expectations are. In terms of identifying those barriers and solutions, sometimes things will come up in a SARB meeting that you are hearing for the first time. Your impression was it was one thing, but then you get to the meeting and something else is disclosed, which is fine, it happens all the time. But knowing how to respond to that, does that mean you need to pull somebody else in? Does that mean you need to take a look at another plan? If it's something that you weren't aware of, maybe you need to make referrals for something. Maybe you thought it was a health-related issue, but really it has to do with trauma and grief. The way that you approach that and how you develop a SARB contract might be different, because you might need to add in some counseling resources. You might need to add in some kind of a mentoring component. You might need to look at other things. So just be prepared for the unexpected, because things come out at the SARB meetings that you are probably not prepared for. At least you weren't expecting to hear. So just be prepared for that. Have resources available. So the thing that Sal gave you, this is a great tool to have during a SARB meeting, because if a parent says, you know, this is what I'm struggling with, I need help with, or if you say, you know, I think a parenting program would be great for you, here's the one that's closest to us, here's the contact information, here's what we need to do. Something like this that's very handy that a parent can walk away with would be very useful. So have those available at that meeting, because you want to have a comeback for everything that a parent might say. If a parent says it's medical, okay, here's some clinics in your area. If it's mental health, here's some providers that can assist. If it's transportation, okay, here's what we can assist with in terms of transportation. You want to always have a solution for the problem, because that will get us hopefully the results that we're looking for. In some cases, you may want to start looking at educational alternatives. If you have a student who's absent a lot because of illness, chronic illness, during a SARB meeting, you may want to have a conversation about whether it might be appropriate to do like a home hospital type situation if it's temporary. So think about alternatives that you have available for you and when they would be appropriate. That might be something that you need to discuss during a SARB meeting, or at least start thinking about. With the contract, you should have a SARB contract at the end of this meeting that lays out the responsibilities of everyone involved, recommends resources, programs, or whatever supports the family needs, what the consequences are for continued absences, meaning going to the next level of SARB, and the person responsible for monitoring progress and follow-up. So all of that should be very clearly laid out in the contract. You need to have the contract available in the appropriate languages for your community. So if you have a Spanish-speaking parent and what you hand them is an English SARB contract, it's not going to be that useful. So make sure that you have the contracts ahead of time in the languages that are appropriate. Make sure that students know what they're signing. Sometimes you got to go through it a couple times and make sure that they know what's being expected of them and what's going to happen if the consequences continue. I would try to put it in kid-friendly terms. We're worried about you because you're missing a lot of school. We need you to try to be here every day and be here on time. If someone, if there's a problem, if someone's bothering you, if there's a reason you're not coming to school, that's what we're talking about. And then going forward, thinking about like, okay, this contract says that you're going to try to be here every day and on time. Ultimately, it's the parent responsible because it's a minor student. So the parent signature is what's most important. But especially once you get into the older kids, for them to have some like ownership over this is related to them becomes important. Now, you may have situations where parents or kids don't want to sign the contract, right? Like you've never had that. Sometimes you'll have people who just flat out refuse. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this meeting. I'm not signing your paperwork. I'm not doing any of this. Okay, well, you've heard what the concerns are. We've tried to communicate with you as the school. We've laid out supports and resources for you. And if you choose not to sign the SARB contract, that's okay. We're just going to make a note on it that said, parent was here, refused to sign. It doesn't mean the process stops, and you can mail home a copy of the contract to them. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a contentious situation where you go back and forth about you must sign the contract. If they don't want to sign it, you just documented that they refused to sign and you go forward. That's not a battle that you want to have play out. Case management and monitoring after the SARB meeting. So you're wanting to make sure that you follow up with the student. Some examples of things that you can do would be like a sign-in system for accountability. So in a lot of schools, what they'll have is a sign-in sheet with the attendance clerk. The kids who are on a SARB contract have to go face-to-face, see the attendance clerk and sign in. I was here. Classroom visits. I used to love doing this as an administrator. My kids that were on SARB, I would block out like an hour of my day once a week, and I had a class schedule and I would just pop in. Your class, your class, your class, your class, and I would see if they were there. Because then they knew following this, I would tell them, I'm going to be checking on you. And they're like, yeah, right. Well, when I started showing up in their classes, yeah, right. And if I could, I would try to like pull up a chair and sit next to them. It was a little embarrassing, but it worked because they could see that accountability and that follow-up, because kids assume that you're not going to follow up. So when you do, it means a lot. Calling the family to check in. It's been a couple weeks since our SART. Attendance seems to be better. Is there anything else that we can do for you? Thank you for your help. Or I see that attendance really hasn't gotten that much better. What's the problem? Because we talked about what the next steps are. So those are things that can help work. Documenting all of those follow-up activities in your student information system. If it's going to go forward, you need to have all your documentation in place because the person screening the SARB cases is going to want to see that you did all that work leading up to it. Okay, so here's an example. Yes, it's outdated from a few years ago, but this basically shows what the success of truancy interventions can look like. And this was pulled out of the Attorney General's report. This was an example in Sonoma County. The first truancy letters, there were over 1,000 truancy letters sent out in this year for grades K through 5. After the letter was sent out, there was improvement. The letters freaked people out. Kids started going to school more. There were only 280 of the second truancy letters that got sent out. Of those kids, 125 ended up being referred to SART because their attendance did not improve. After the SART meetings, that number went down to 50, where they actually had to send out the third truancy notification. And after that one, of that, only 17 were referred to SARB. So when you look at, this is an example of the kind of curve that you would want to see in this process, where by instituting interventions at these different levels, you really got down to a manageable number of cases that you could work with in terms of the SARB process. So really, in thinking about it, again, the goal is not to get to SARB. These are going to be your toughest, most challenging cases who have not responded to anything else. If you invest a lot of your time in these tier 1 and tier 2 and you focus on this at the site level, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. Because realistically, when you go to SARB, you may have some cases turn around, but you have a lot of families who are still going to struggle even beyond that point. SARB is not going to fix everything. It's a tool, it's a great tool, but a lot of the work that can be done here at the school site level is going to get you the more bang for your buck.